I used to think peace had a sound. You know, the slow, familiar groan of my little wooden bridge under my pickup, the whisper of Silverbrook Creek sliding over rock, the wind working its way through the pines like it had all the time in the world. And for 15 years that bridge carried nothing heavier than my truck, a couple of delivery vans, and neighborhood kids on bikes racing home before dinner. It was mine, paid for, built with my own hands and the hands of my friend Raul Vega. And every time I crossed it, I felt one simple truth. I could come home without asking anybody's permission. Back when I bought this slice of land at the far edge of what would become Maple Ridge Estates, there was no HOA, no logo on letterhead, no board emails written like court summons, just trees, gravel, the creek, and a survey from Redwood County that showed one clear thing. The public right-of-way stopped 50 feet before the water. Everything beyond that was mine, bank to bank. So Raul and I spent a summer sinking pilings into bedrock, bolting beams, laying planks, sealing every board by hand. And when we were done, my dad came out, leaned on the railing, and said, "Son, that's not just a bridge, that's a boundary." And I didn't really get it then, but I do now. 2 years ago, the Quiet got a logo and a newsletter. The Maple Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. I didn't fight it at first. I paid the first $50 beautification fee. I like a working streetlight like anyone else. But committees grow like ivy, slow and polite until they're wrapping around your throat. And the vine had a name. Brenda Ashford, self-appointed queen of cul-de-sacs, clipboards, and phrases like, "For the community," sprinkled on everything like salt. The first letter from Brenda showed up in my mailbox on pastel paper, courtesy reminder. It said that non-compliant structure near the front of my property needed to be addressed. Attached was a blurry photo of my canoe rack and the approach to my bridge. I sent back a copy of my warranty deed and the stamped survey from Redwood County. Circled the line that said the public easement ended well before Silverbrook Creek. And I wrote, as polite as I could manage, "The bridge and approaches are private, not community amenities." At the next Maple Ridge HOA board meeting, Brenda rolled out a laminated map that looked like it had been printed from a phone app, the creek drawn like a cartoon snake, property lines wandering wherever she needed them to go. She tapped the screen with her pen and said, in that sugar-coated attorney voice she loved to use, "As you can see, the approaches provide access to shared amenities, which places them under association purview." And I held up my real map, the one tied to iron pins in the ground. "As you can see, Ms. Ashford, everything west of the creek is within my metes and bounds. This bridge is my driveway, not your park." She gave me that smile people reserve for toddlers and drunks. "We'll take it under advisement," which in HOA language means, we'll ignore the law if it gets in our way. 2 weeks later, I heard a new sound, a low diesel growl and the rhythmic slosh of a churning drum. I stepped onto the porch and watched a full-size cement truck crawl down my gravel lane. The logo of a contractor hired by the HOA slapped on the side. And in the passenger seat, sunglasses on, hair perfect at 6 in the morning, sat Brenda, waving across my land like she was in a parade. By the time I got close enough to speak, the truck was already on my bridge, boards humming, rails shivering, creek underneath turning brown with mud. "You're trespassing," I said, hand on the railing, feeling the vibration. "Then maybe you should build a stronger bridge, Ethan," she said, like she was giving me home improvement advice, not driving 12 tons across a structure she didn't own. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't about concrete. It was about control. She wanted to drive trucks over my bridge the same way she tried to drive over everyone else. And in her mind, my property line was just a suggestion she hadn't edited yet. The next day, I sank posts at the mouth of the bridge, hung a reflective sign, "Private bridge, 5-ton limit, trespassers prosecuted," ran a chain between 2 bollards, put a real lock on it, took pictures, printed timestamps. I even called Brenda and told her, as calmly as I could, no more HOA traffic over Silverbrook Creek. By lunch, the chain was cut, the lock tossed in the dirt, and my sign was gone. In its place was a pastel notice with the Maple Ridge Estates logo, "Non-compliant barrier, remove within 24 hours or face fines," taped to my own post. That night, I walked the length of the bridge with a flashlight, checked every hanger, every bolt, measured how much the boards deflected under my pickup. It was still sound for what Raul and I had designed it for, but a hairline crack glinted along one plank like a bruise, not collapse, just a warning. And standing there over that quiet strip of water, I realized I'd been playing defense on my own land. If they wanted to ignore signs, maybe it was time the bridge spoke a language they couldn't fake in a meeting. The next morning, Raul Vega pulled into my driveway in his beat-up blue Ford, toolboxes rattling in the back, thermos in hand, the same way he had 15 years earlier when the bridge was nothing but a sketch on a napkin. "Heard you've got traffic problems," he said, leaning on the hood, eyes flicking towards Silverbrook Creek. "More like a weight problem," I answered, leading him down to the water. We stood there for a long minute just listening, the creek working around the pilings, boards creaking softly like they were part of the conversation. He crouched, tapped a stringer with his wrench, nodded. "Your work holds, compadre. The bridge is fine. It's the fools on top of it that are the issue." I took him back to my garage, rolled out our original hand-drawn plans on the workbench, the blue paper yellowed at the corners. "You remember this section?" I asked, pointing at the midspan reinforcement. He traced the line: dual plate girders, carriage bolts, designed for 15 tons, distributed. Then he stopped, looked up at me. "If you pull these bolts, the load shifts to the outer beams, still safe for your truck, but not for a mixer." "I'm not trying to kill anyone," I said, heart pounding a little just saying it out loud. "I'm trying to teach boundaries to people who don't read surveys." "Engineers don't sabotage," Raul muttered, pouring coffee into the lid of his thermos. "We demonstrate failure modes." "Exactly," I said, and he sighed, shook his head, then started helping. We spent the afternoon peeling up a section of decking at the center, swapping out solid connectors for shear pins that looked identical from above, metal designed to bend and disengage when overloaded, harmless for a half-ton pickup, unforgiving for a 12-ton drum. We mounted trail cameras in the alders aimed at license plates and faces, bolted a motion-triggered camera under the span, tested everything with my truck. The bridge flexed, groaned, settled back, perfectly within spec. By dusk, the bridge looked exactly the same as it had the day before, only now it had a spine that could say enough when somebody pretended gravity didn't apply to them. 2 days later, right on schedule, the HOA parade returned. Brenda in a red windbreaker with Maple Ridge HOA stitched on the chest, arms folded like a general reviewing troops, a cement truck crawling behind her, drum churning, workers laughing on the running boards. I watched from the porch, tablet in one hand, coffee in the other, the creek glassy and still under the morning light. When the mixer rolled onto the decking, the boards took the weight like they always did. Then the truck reached the altered midspan. The shear pins felt the overload, bent inwards, and the structure sagged just enough to make the driver panic. He slammed the brakes. The drum sloshed forward, the front axle dipped, and a wave of wet cement spilled through the open hatch, cascading into Silverbrook Creek like gray lava, coating stones, soaking Brenda's expensive boots when she ran closer, screaming that my life was over. She'd called the sheriff before they even arrived, expecting handcuffs and humiliation waiting for me on my own driveway. But when the deputy stepped out of his cruiser and saw the 5-ton limit, private bridge sign in full view, saw the footage showing every overweight crossing, he took one long look at Brenda, then at me, then said, "Ma'am, ignoring a posted limit on private property is on the driver, not the owner." Her jaw dropped. She pointed at me like she could stab a hole through my chest from 10 feet away. "He rigged it to fail." The deputy frowned. "He built a bridge rated for small vehicles. You brought a cement plant. That's not failure, that's math." Someone's kid filmed the whole thing, of course, and that 30 seconds of chaos ended up online before the tow truck even got the mixer out of the creek. The title was brutal, something like HOA President's Cement Truck Meets Karma, and by evening Brenda Ashford had become Cement Brenda on every local meme page. That should have been the end, but people like Brenda don't know when they've lost. They just change battlefields. She fired off mass emails accusing me of reckless endangerment, sent a cease and desist that looked like it had been typed in Comic Sans, plastered the Maple Ridge Facebook group with grainy photos of my bridge and captions about dangerous private structures, even printed flyers with my face under the words, "Threat to community safety," and taped them to mailboxes and cafe bulletin boards. I answered the way my dad would have, not with shouting, but with receipts. I dug out every old permit from Redwood County, the original approval for Coalbridge, private crossing, the drainage study from the Department of Natural Resources saying the creek was non-navigable and privately managed. Every line that proved the HOA had as much jurisdiction over Silverbrook Creek as they did over the moon. When the county inspector finally came, gray uniform, sun-bleached clipboard, he walked the bridge, flipped through my folder, nodded once and said, "Looks good. Mr. Cole, you're up to code." The truck wasn't. The more Brenda pushed, the more the neighborhood split. My neighbor Emily Ross showed up with banana bread and whispers from the grapevine. "Half the people think you're a folk hero," she said. "The other half think you've got a bunker under that bridge." "You seen a bunker?" I asked, because if I had one, I'd charge HOA storage. Behind the drama, something else was shifting. Thomas Hale, a retired attorney on the board, started quoting the charter in group emails, reminding everyone that HOA funds couldn't be used for private vendettas. The treasurer, Noah Price, called me one night with his voice low and shaking, told me Brenda had revised the official HOA map, sliding the boundary line 50 feet onto my land. He sent me the original and the edited version, side by side, and I stared at them feeling that quiet anger that doesn't raise its voice, the kind that just starts building a case. When the lawsuit finally arrived, thick paper, gold HOA seal, Brenda demanded $250,000 for emotional distress and destruction of shared infrastructure. I carried the envelope out to the bridge, set it on the railing, and laughed so hard I scared a heron out of the reeds. Then I hired Laura Green, a property lawyer who'd made a career out of dismantling people exactly like Brenda Ashford. She sat at my kitchen table, glasses low on her nose, flipping through surveys, permits, still frames from my cameras. And when she looked up, she had that small, dangerous smile of someone who sees 3 moves ahead on the board. "We're not just going to win," she said. "We're going to make sure she can't do this to anyone else again." The day we walked into the Redwood County Courthouse, it felt like the whole of Maple Ridge Estates had turned out to watch. Pastel sweaters lined the benches, phones ready, half the subdivision clearly hoping to see me get destroyed, the other half praying I'd finish what the bridge had started. Brenda sat at the front in a sharp navy blazer, pearls, new lawyer at her side, the kind of guy who bills by the syllable. Her attorney opened like he was auditioning for television, told the judge I was a menace, that I'd modified a community bridge out of spite, that I'd nearly killed people to make a point. He flashed a blown-up still of the cement truck tilted over Silverbrook Creek. Brenda frozen mid-scream, and for a second, I almost felt sorry for her, almost. Then Laura Green stood, steady, no theatrics, just a binder labeled facts. She laid out the chain of events like a story she'd rehearsed 100 times. Private bridge, posted weight limit, repeated trespass, ignored warnings, video proof from multiple angles, county approvals, the deed, the old plat map, the Department of Natural Resources study, and every time Brenda's lawyer tried to object, the judge shut him down with one look. They put Brenda on the stand, and she did what she does. She cried at the right places, talked about community safety, about feeling terror when the truck sagged, about me being hostile since day one. But when Laura asked one simple question, "How many times did your trucks cross a clearly posted 5-ton bridge?" the whole story started to crack. Then Raul Vega took the stand in his denim jacket and work boots, swore his oath, and explained in simple, patient words how we'd overbuilt the bridge for light vehicles, how any mixer that size was flirting with disaster whether I'd touched a bolt or not. And when Brenda's lawyer tried to twist that into an admission of sabotage, Raul just shook his head and said, "We didn't build it to fail. We built it to be respected. The bridge did its job, the people didn't." The moment that really broke it, though, wasn't the video of the truck or the map or the weight calculations. It was when Laura put 2 versions of the Maple Ridge Estates boundary map in front of the judge. The original one Noah Price had quietly sent me, and the revised one Brenda had been using. The lot line for my parcel marched 20, 30, 50 feet at a time, right into Silverbrook Creek like property law was a suggestion. The judge stared at them for a long time, then looked over his glasses at Brenda. "Who altered this document?" he asked, and the courtroom went so quiet you could have heard Silverbrook running if the windows were open. Her lawyer tried to shield her, said he'd never seen the original, that he'd acted in good faith. The judge wasn't buying it. He dismissed the HOA's claim with prejudice, invited me to pursue my own damages if I wanted. then said he was referring the falsified map for investigation. The gavel's crack echoed in my chest like a release valve, months of pressure finally letting go. I thought that was the end, but Brenda Ashford still had one more meeting in her, one last attempt to spin the story. The HOA called an emergency post-trial safety session at the clubhouse, and I went, not because I owed them anything, but because I wanted the final word in the same room where she'd once waved that laminated cartoon map in my face. She stood up in front of the projector, claimed the court had ignored crucial context, promised an appeal, talked about protecting families from dangerous private structures. And I let her finish, let the murmurs rise, let her hold on to control for one more minute. Then I walked down the aisle with a manila envelope under my arm, plugged a flash drive into the projector, and put up something nobody in that room had seen before. Not Brenda, not the board, not even Laura. A federal permit from 2006, stamped and signed, granting the owner of my parcel, me, exclusive private access over Silverbrook Creek, the waterway classified as non-navigable, excluded from HOA and municipal oversight, 20-year term, recently renewed, backed by the U.S. Department of Transportation, and I read the key line out loud, slowly, so everyone could feel it land. No homeowners association shall assert control over the crossing or channel without written consent of the permit holder. In other words, not only was the bridge mine, but so was the water under it, in a way no HOA bylaw could touch. You could see it in their faces, the neighbors who'd sided with her, the ones who'd stayed quiet out of fear, realization spreading like a ripple, followed quickly by something that looked a lot like anger, not at me, but at the woman who dragged them all into this mess. Thomas Hale called for a vote right there. Removal of Brenda Ashford as president for misuse of funds, document manipulation, harassment of a homeowner on private land. The eyes shook the walls. Not a single hand rose in her defense. She packed her folder with shaking hands and walked out without looking back. No cameras, no drones, just the sound of her heels through a hallway that didn't belong to her anymore. A week later, the Maple Ridge Estates Homeowners Association sent me an official letter, not a threat, not a fine, but an apology, recognition of my ownership of the bridge, acknowledgement that what had happened was wrong, a check to cover some of my legal costs. I didn't cash it. I framed it and hung it above the coat rack, a little piece of paper proof that sometimes bullies write their own confession. These days, Silverbrook Creek sounds like it did before the trucks came, just water, stone, wind. The bridge has fresh sealant, new bolts, the same bones rowel, and I gave it the first summer. Neighbors roll by, they wave again, some stop and say they're sorry it took so long to speak up. The HOA meetings have turned into potlucks where people argue about mulch instead of power. Most mornings, I walk to the center of the span, feel it move just a fraction under my weight, and think about everything that tried to break it, not just cement and steel, but arrogance, lies, the belief that titles beat truth. I run my hand along the rail and whisper, "We held." And the creek answers in its own language, the only law that never blinks, gravity. This story, to me, was never really about revenge. It was about respect, about knowing where your line is and refusing to let anyone redraw it with a cheap map and a louder voice. About patience that looks like silence until the moment it has proof, and then speaks once, clearly, and doesn't need to shout again. So I'll ask you this. Now that you've walked this bridge with me, was I wrong to let engineering and the law teach a lesson the HOA refused to learn, or was that the only kind of justice someone like Brenda ever understands? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you've got your own HOA nightmare, your own Karen, who crossed a line one too many times, share it. I read every story, because somewhere out there, somebody else is staring at their own bridge, wondering if they're strong enough to stand firm. And I'm here to tell you, you might be closer than you think.